We'll call this regular meeting of the San Carlos City Council to order. I'm going to open this just by making a brief observation about one of my favorite quotes from Benjamin Franklin, who was purportedly asked when he stepped outside on the last day of the Constitutional Convention by a woman acquaintance of his. She said, "Well, doctor, what have we got, a republic or a monarchy?" And he replied, "A republic, if you can keep it." And by our work tonight and by the work of similar organizations around the country, we continue to keep it. So with that, if you'd join me to rise for the Pledge of Allegiance.
I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
First item, Mr. City Manager, Mr. Maltby, are there any changes to the order of the agenda?
No changes from staff this evening, Mr. Mayor.
Any changes that the dais wants to make? Okay. Mr. Rubens, any report from closed session?
There are no reportable items from the special meeting closed agenda, Mr. Mayor.
Very good. We'll move on to council communications and announcements. Mr. Johnson.
Thank you. Well, I'm excited to be here, my very first city council meeting. Since swearing in, I attended a couple community events. I attended the San Mateo County Council of Cities meeting in Colma, where we had, with a couple of my colleagues, and we had a great dinner served by the firemen of Colma. I attended a legislative update session from Assemblyman Kevin Mullen, where we talked a lot about the past assembly session, and there was a focus in particular on long-term solutions for new economic development tools, including tax increment financing. I also attended a legislative update from Congresswoman Jackie Speer with a lot of talk about federal issues, and there was an update on the recent sea level rise hearing that she held in San Mateo County. Focus on implementation of the Affordable Care Act, and some discussion about federal action regarding the PG&E line 147. So that's it.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Being in the health insurance business, I've been quite busy the last few months, so I haven't had a lot of time to do many activities apart from the council, but I did have the opportunity to go to the Harbor Industrial Association lunch last week. I had a great presentation on the replacement of all the force main sewers, which is very interesting. If you were there, I wouldn't want to show you the pictures, but it was quite entertaining. Also had the opportunity to attend the 65th anniversary of the Rotary Club of San Carlos's anniversary, or their formation, last Friday. And it was a great lunch. Rotary is a wonderful service club. They've done incredible things for this town, and a lot of people don't know what they've done because they work so quietly and efficiently, and they have a long-time service to our community, along with all the other service clubs that we have. Anyway, I want to publicly thank the Rotary again for inviting me, and a very enjoyable meeting.
Mr. Basili.
As Mr. Collins said, for the holidays, there wasn't an awful lot of things going on. Attended that dinner in Colma with Mr. Johnson talked about. Also had a meeting with the South Bayside System Authority, which will be is on our agenda tonight for a couple of items. As you probably all read, there's a strain apparently of avian flu that apparently has infected a number of birds down at the in the area there where we have a huge, almost a lake, and that's going to have to be drained. Just to make sure everybody understands, there's no problem. It doesn't affect humans. It just affects birds, but it is doing some extreme damage to them. Other than that, I don't think I have anything, Mr. Mayor.
That's fine, Mr. Grisilli. Thank you. I just had a few items here and then one little procedural comment. I had a good meeting with a number of the members of the San Carlos Green organization during the month of December since our last meeting. And they actually, as a result of that discussion, there's a couple of things I'd like to ask that council consider taking up. One is they had raised what I thought was a very good question about what are our trash diversion obligations under state law, because we're all supposed to be disposing of less in landfills and putting more into recycling, and how do we plan on meeting those over the long term? I thought that'd be a good discussion, take a little bit of staff time to get into, so that's something I hope we will address at our February strategic planning meeting. The other question they raised, which I thought was a good one too, is our building codes, as we know from what we adopted in December, are moving to incorporate more and more, I guess, of what I would call non-structural, non-safety things. There's more things about resource efficiency, energy efficiency, water consumption, and whatnot. And so the question that was posed is, how are we actually meeting that obligation? Do we have sufficient resources on the inspection front? Do we have sufficient training? There have been, rumored comments in other communities, not necessarily in ours, about building inspections not necessarily incorporating those elements. And so I think that's something that, if the council agrees to, I'd like to actually see staff come back with a report on, just talk about that, talk about what resource needs might be there. I, too, went to the Rotary Club luncheon for their 65 years of service, and one of the astounding things about San Carlos is how many impressive volunteer organizations we have and how many long-standing impressive volunteer organizations we have. And as Mr. Collins said, Rotary, like many of the other organizations, has done far more than most people realize, far more, I think, than perhaps even some of the Rotarians themselves realize. So it was an honor to be able to present them with a proclamation from the city and to help them celebrate their first 65 years. The one other item that I'd like to mention to my colleagues that I'm hoping we will fit into a future agenda is I'd like to actually have a discussion about council compensation. As I think some folks may or may not be aware, there are, we get paid a per meeting fee, I guess, stipend. There's also some, if one takes advantage of it, there's also some medical insurance reimbursement or medical insurance benefit associated with that. And it occurred to me, just in the context of good government, the only three entities, if you will, that the council employs are Mr. Maltby, Mr. Rubens, and ourselves. And we vote on two of those three in terms of their compensation every year and talk about it. And I think it's been a while since we talked about the council compensation. So I'm hoping we can address that sometime before the budget cycle for this year. And lastly, the procedural issue that I mentioned that I was going to cite is I'd like to actually ask my colleagues, as we're going through action items, things where we have to take votes, what I'm used to from my days on the school board is there's usually a staff presentation, public comment if there's any public comment to be made, Q&A from the dais about trying to understand what the issues are. But then before any discussion takes place, there actually needs to be a motion and a second. And that's actually designed to make sure that the dais actually wants to act on it, because there are things that can end up on the agenda that the dais may not want to have there. But more importantly, it also serves to focus the discussion. So I just mentioned if we can try and do that as we go through tonight and future meetings as an experiment and see how that works. So basically it would be make a motion, make a second before we actually have our discussion. So with that, we will move on to presentations. And tonight, Ms. Moy, we're doing a presentation for the Parks and Rec Foundation? Okay.
See, they're giving us money.
Yes.
It's always good.
I was so excited for my first in-chamber proclamation. I was going to leap down there, but
we'll let you know.
Thank you, Ms. Boland, for correcting me.
Members of the City Council, Christine Boland, Parks and Recreation Director, and welcome Councilmember Johnson to the council. It's my pleasure this evening to introduce the president of the Parks and Recreation Foundation, Steve Divney. Steve, if you want to come up. And also, while he's coming up, I just wanted to mention the...
Causing trouble. Throw it away.
Just wanted to report, in case you had questions, Phase 2 of Burton Park is slightly on time. It is on time, and it's definitely under budget. And we're not ready to open quite yet. We have a few extra add-ons, but we'll be getting the word shortly, and we'll open towards the end of the month. So we'll let you know. We'll have a nice ribbon cutting. So with that, Steve Divney, President of the Parks and Recreation Foundation.
Thank you, Christine. Good evening.
Evening, Steve.
I'm going to introduce members of our foundation board, some of whom are here tonight. But before we do that, I just wanted to thank you for the vision, along with the Parks and Rec Department and city staff, for having our gem of a park be even better polished, if you will, by having the addition of not only the stage, but the bocce courts and the new basketball courts and standards, which probably haven't been touched for 50 plus years. So we will be presenting a symbolic check to the city to help defray those costs for Burton Park Phase 2, as those improvements are known. And that represents the last couple of years of donations from individuals, families, small business organizations, and service organizations, some of which you mentioned this evening. So with that, I'm going to bring up some of the board members. I'd like to introduce Laura Tuchel, Steve Aguirre, Tony Bullock, Debbie Denton, and Richard Armanino. Did I miss anyone? And Mr. Mayor, if you'd like to come down.
I'm always willing to come down for
All right.
a $250,000 check.
I'm going to say, Ms. Boland, it's time for the iPad now. She's already cashed it.
Nice to have it. I think
It comes and it goes,
radically.
radically.
Can everybody hear me? Or I guess it won't get recorded. Okay, there. I guess I'll lean over here. Well, what I was going to say is that I'm here to present a proclamation to the Parks and Rec Foundation to honor them for all of their hard work, and it's obvious that we got the better end of this deal. So we really, really appreciate all the work that has been done. I don't even have my iPad on me. It's my...
Good thing we're refurbishing this place.
You know, we often talk about, in fact, we did just a minute ago, about the tremendous depth of volunteer organization support in San Carlos. And a lot of what makes San Carlos what it is not what the staff does, or certainly not what the council does, but it's the work of individuals committed to making the community better. But there's another dimension to that, too, which is the generosity of this community. This is an incredibly generous community. Whether it's to support schools, whether it's to support Parks and Rec Foundation, whether it's to support people around the world who have suffered great losses, like in past Christian or whatnot, there's really a tremendous amount of outpouring in all those cases from residents in San Carlos to help make the world a little bit better, particularly make San Carlos a little bit better. And that's really ultimately a big part of why we want to thank the San Carlos Parks and Rec Foundation for all the great work it's done. And so I'd like to present this proclamation to you. If you'd all like to come back up again. So this we present to you folks. Again, thank you for all your hard work. And it's not just a matter of raising the money, it's also all the other things that you do as well that make the parks and the recreation facilities in San Carlos better. I understand, by the way, that you're going to have a new service detail. I think Ms. Boland is going to be giving lessons on how to play bocce ball.
She better add a vowel to her name.
Thanks again. Appreciate it.
Mr. Mayor, I think if Ms. Boland is going to give lessons, she's got to add a vowel to her name, so just wanted to pass that on.
She'll have a choice of several, I think, right, that we can hit. All right. With that, we will move on to public comment. I have 2 speaker cards here. If there's anybody else who would like to address the council on an item that's not on the agenda, please fill out one of the cards and hand it in to staff, and they'll bring it up here. If you have comments you want to make on an item that's on the agenda, you should submit a card for that, and we'll get to you when we get to that item. So the first person is Andre Carpio.
Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. My name is André Carpio. I come from Emeryville, and welcome to the new council, Mr. Cameron Johnson. Is it Johnson Cameron or Cameron Johnson?
Cameron Johnson.
Okay. Thank you. I come to claim my solar car, and I'll take the check as a down payment for compensation. If it's a down payment. So I want to make you aware that my solar car was stolen 10 years ago, and that the police mishandled the car, and I'm still paying for the insurance, the registration, and my car is gone. The police gave it to someone who really talks well. Anyway, perhaps seem to have an accent. So, to make you aware, the chief here, as a cover-up, made a nice memorandum, and you should read it. It's interesting. And that is so interesting that all the main points of ownership are missing. For instance, I'm the inventor, and by the standard of technology, an inventor is the owner of his patent. And here my art history, my solar car, has been given to someone else. So I have more than one invention, but the solar car is the one that really has the most of it. And so this is to make you aware of the atmosphere. When I come here, I come to complain about my solar car, and the city council and the police hasn't done anything for 10 years. So there is quite a bit of interest to be. I'm not being sarcastic, you know. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Carpio. The next speaker is Laura Finucci. Thank you for providing the pronunciation guide too.
Good evening, Mayor, members of the council, and city staff. I'm Laura Finucci, San Carlos resident and also the Associate Director of HIP Housing, here to wish you a Happy New Year and to present you with HIP Housing's 2014 calendar. This is the contest we have every year for students kindergarten through 5th grade. I think we received about 250 entries this year, and we picked 3 school districts. So we picked San Mateo, Foster City, and San Bruno. We'll come back again to San Carlos for sure. But it's a contest for the kids to write a statement about what their home means to them and then to draw a picture of their home. So I just wanted to read one of the quotes from our kindergartner, Winder, who actually is the son of one of our home sharing counselors. And he says, "I can't wait to come home every day to my safe and cozy house. It makes me happy to help my little brother read, play, and be creative. We can also be really silly too." So that's Kyle in kindergarten. And we use these calendars as an outreach tool to educate the community about our home sharing program, self-sufficiency program for families with children, and the properties that we own and manage. And we're very appreciative of the support that the City of San Carlos has shown our organization. Every year we provide housing to about 1,400 individuals through these 3 programs, and we can't do that work without support like the cities. And we just want to thank you, and we hope you enjoy the calendar throughout the year. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Ms. Finucci. Yeah, and I want to mention as well that I was at your holiday party and purchased not only the calendar but the note card collections.
Yes.
And the quotes from the kids on them are, and besides the pictures, are really phenomenal.
Yes, they're great quotes and they're great children, and we're just really thankful to have this contest so the kids can learn about affordable housing, what it means to have a place to call home.
Right.
Thank you.
Thanks. Thank you. All right. We'll move along now to, did we have another speaker for? Okay, thank you. We'll move along now to approval of the consent calendar. The consent calendar is a set of items that is normally approved all at once without discussion, although any council member or community member can ask that an item be removed and considered individually. So I would entertain a motion regarding the consent calendar with the caveat that I myself would like to remove item 8K.
Mr. Mayor, I make a motion to approve consent calendar items 8A, B, C, D, E, F, G, H, I, and J.
I second.
There's a motion and a second. All in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Aye. Any opposed or abstentions? No. Okay. We will, as is our customary practice, we will deal with item 8K at the end of the meeting. Reports to council. First up is an update on Britton Avenue widening.
Good evening, Honorable Mayor and members of the council. I'd like to also welcome Councilmember Johnson to the dais. That's probably be a theme for tonight. But my name is Matt Lee. I'm the city engineer. I'm reporting to council today, excuse me, on the Britton Avenue widening project. There will be no action required of council today. This is just merely a report to council, what the project is, where we are so far, and what we intend to do. First, we start off with the location of the project. It's on Britton Avenue at Industrial, which is on the east side of San Carlos, just west of Highway 101. The project itself consists of, as you see in the photo on the presentation, widening just 5 feet on the south side of Britton Avenue, west of Industrial, to increase the lane capacity in that area for the eastbound traffic, which will now reconfigure the travel lanes to allow for one dedicated left turn lane, one through travel lane, and a shared through and right turn lane. Current conditions only allow for a shared through and right turn lane and a shared through and left turn lane. The purpose of the project itself is to accommodate turning of vehicles from Britton Avenue onto Industrial, to maintain the adequate levels of service and traffic load capacity for existing and future traffic demands, and to continue to serve as a primary gateway and a major regional entry point to the city of San Carlos. The budget for the project currently is at $846,000. $300,000 of which is being contributed by PAMF, and with the remaining amount of approximately $546,000 coming from the traffic impact fees. The overall project cost to date totals up to roughly about $740,000, which includes about $126,000 for final design and right-of-way acquisition, and the construction cost in 2009 dollars estimated at roughly $530,000. For the project itself, the project was initiated back in March of 2009, where the city engaged BKF for conceptual designs to mitigate the cumulative impacts of future projects for that intersection. And with BKF staff and the Transportation and Circulation Commission, in August of 2009, they worked together and recommended a preferred alternative for the project. And after that, there was an outreach to the residents in September of 2010, where they described the project to the affected parties. And in November of 2011, developed a draft environmental document, which was the initial study mitigated negative declaration, or ISMND. And in September of 2013, we circulated the ISMND, and in public comment closed in October of 2013. There was no public comment for the project itself, so staff had decided to finalize the environmental document. The next steps for council, we will be returning to council on the January 27th meeting to get a formal approval of the project itself for environmental purposes, to approve the ISMND, and for council to authorize us to amend the contract with BKF to finalize design and to engage in Kathy Woods and Associates to acquire the needed right-of-way. The duration of the project would be roughly about 6 months for final design and about 6 months for construction. The potential schedule risk for the project is the right-of-way acquisition and the utility relocations. But overall, if everything goes smoothly, the project can be completed within about 12 months. With that said, I leave it to the dais for any questions that you may have.
Mr. Lee? Questions for Mr. Lee? Mr. Johnson?
Hi. Could you go back to the timeline slide, please? Sorry, the previous action slide. And can you talk a little bit? So it looks like this was kicked off about 5 years ago.
Mm-hmm.
Can you talk about why it's taken 5 years?
The project itself, I think, was initiated 5 years ago, and a portion of the delay, I believe, came from the turnover in staff in the Public Works Department itself. And I think at the time from November 2011 to September 2013, there was a turnover in staff, and then I think at one point the city decided that it would be best to delay the project slightly due to the right-of-way acquisition that would be needed. And we strategically thought it would be best to pick this project up around this time, and that's what we've decided to do.
And what was the right-of-way acquisition that was needed? So we needed to purchase a right-of-way, or?
So we would need to acquire right-of-way. That's what our right-of-way acquisition consultant's going to help us with. It either would be purchasing right-of-way or purchasing easements.
Mm-hmm.
If you look at the image on the slide here, the darkened area is about approximately 5 foot of width that we'd need to acquire from the sidewalk, which encroaches onto private property. And so that would be where we would need to acquire right-of-way if we were to move forward with this design.
Got it. Thanks.
Other questions?
Save it for the 27th.
I did have one other quick question of my own, Mr. Lee. Oh, did you have some? Yeah. Oh, just feel free. Please go ahead.
Thank you, Matt. Just a couple. I assume the redwood trees there on the south side are coming out. What sort of a replacement landscaping are you planning?
There is because we have not finalized design yet, we haven't come up with a replacement landscaping, but we will.
Okay.
Currently, from what we understand, there will probably be about 12 trees that will be removed, and 3 of them will be the large redwood trees on the northeast side of that intersection. And so there will be a replacement plan. There's just not one yet because we have not finalized design.
Okay. Do we have that slide?
No, we don't have that slide.
I was going to say. I was looking.
That was an anticipated question, so.
Okay.
That was.
I didn't even call you first.
That was in the secret slide deck.
Oh, the secret slide deck. The other question I had was, I noticed that there's $546,000 of traffic impact fees. Where did those come from? I noticed that PAMF is specifically broken out.
Yeah, so there was I think back in 2008, there was a traffic impact fee plan determined, and there was contributions from developers based on the projected developments in the area. Mm-hmm. And they were, the developers were, it was determined that the developers would contribute a specific amount based on the projects that were in the traffic impact fee plan itself. And so it's essentially a contribution from other developments within the area that may affect this intersection.
All right. Thank you.
I just had one quick question, Mr. Lee, which is when staff brings this back at the end of the month, will there be an updated financial component to it? I noticed the cost, one of the cost elements was in $2,009.
Yeah, so the cost element the updated cost element would be redone during final design. Currently, right now, we don't have any consultants engaged in order to do that. And so we were using cost based on the last best numbers that we have.
I'll ask staff to consider whether or not making some kind of, if it's necessary, some kind of horseback guess adjustment for what may have transpired.
Yeah, we can do that.
That would be helpful for me.
Yeah, we can go and project out based on CPI.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Okay, the next item up under reports to council is an update on the condition of the PG&E natural gas line 147.
Good evening, Mr. Mayor and members of the City Council. Jeff Maltby, City Manager. I'm here with our City Attorney, Greg Rubens. Give you a brief update on our ongoing situation with Line 147 and PG&E and the CPUC. As I'm sure you're all aware, as I know you are all aware, the CPUC issued a decision last month allowing PG&E to repressurize Line 147 up to its MAOP of, I believe, 330 pounds per square inch of gas. PG&E has done so the line is operating at that maximum MAOP, as far as I know.
Mr. Maltby, I apologize. MAOP, I know what that is.
Maximum allowable operating pressure.
Thank you.
Means the pipe is full of gas, and as it was before we declared a state of emergency. The city's position remains unchanged from where we were before. We believe a number of key safety questions have been overlooked and discounted by the CPUC and PG&E, and we'd like to continue to allow some time in the process to make sure that those questions are properly answered, as opposed to getting blanket statements from PG&E that the line is safe. Our expert that we've engaged, Dr. Stevick, a world-renowned expert in pipelines, an expert acknowledged by the CPUC and PG&E as an expert in this field, is recommending that the pipe be operated at no more than 240 pounds per square inch of gas. His report was not introduced into evidence, is not on the record in the CPUC hearings. We'll be moving to have it introduced. The city attorney in just a few moments will talk a little bit about the next steps that have been authorized by the city council as we continue to pursue this issue to make sure that the residents here in San Carlos who live, work, and travel along Line 147 are safe in our community. Some key areas that haven't been addressed, which stem from the original email that was written by a PG&E engineer, deal with questions that were raised by that engineer about whether or not Line 147 may have been damaged in the hydrostatic pressure testing that was conducted by PG&E about 2 years ago, a year before the pipeline developed a leak. Those questions are very key and central to the city's concerns around Line 147. And to date, there's been no evidence introduced, or really, quite frankly, any discussion on the record about whether or not the hydrostatic pressure test could have damaged the line, and what, if anything, PG&E has done to verify that the entire length of the line, not just one 3-foot segment, wasn't damaged by the hydrostatic pressure test. Our expert has introduced evidence showing, at least within a certain section of the pipe, that it's possible for some of this steel to survive the pressure test, yet develop flaws during the process. This may or may not be what happened with this leak that developed last year that wasn't properly reported by PG&E, and they were subsequently fined some $14 million, I believe, by the CPUC last month. In addition to that, approximately 25% of Line 147 remains uncharacterized as it travels through San Carlos. That means that PG&E has no idea as to what type of material, what age of the pipe, or what its composition is in the ground. We're asking for PG&E to rectify the situation. There are several areas of Line 147 that need to be modified in upcoming projects by PG&E before it can be pigged. And a pig is a probe that's passed through the line. That's going to take some time to do. We've asked PG&E to pig the line from both ends. They've refused. Rather than let a probe go in one end and then send it through the other end until they get to the points where they can't go any further, that would at least provide a good deal of additional information on the line. That's not something they've been willing to do. I'm not sure why. We're pushing for those projects to allow the line to be piggable to move quicker. I believe PG&E's current timeline, and they have representatives here who can maybe speak to this better than I, but I believe it's 2016 when they're planning to have the line pigged. We'd like to see that happen sooner rather than later. We'd like any of this 1929 refurbished used pipe to be removed from line 147 and replaced with new pipe. In fact, we'd like the whole length of line 147 to be replaced with a new pipeline before allowing it to operate at such a high pressure. So that's where we are. I'll turn it over to the city attorney to provide a little bit of information about some next steps in terms of the legal process.
Thank you, Jeff. Mr. Mayor, council members. The next steps that we're recommending and council has authorized is first at the CPUC level to apply for file an application for a rehearing. There's a limited timeline to file such an application, and that's we're going to proceed with our special counsel to file that. The rehearing, the purpose of that is to alert the commission to what we believe is a legal error by both the administrative law judge and the commission. And there's a couple of layers to the legal error that we think exists that need to be addressed by the CPUC. And one is the expedited process that we went through that was set by the administrative law judge. We were not given an opportunity to have our expert, Dr. Glenn Stevick, complete his analysis of the pipeline metal that was removed so that he could analyze the metal and analyze its characteristics with regard to the pressure test and with regards to its ability to withstand pressure tests and how long it can last before it needs to be tested again. And that's, I'm not an engineer, but basically the characteristics of the metal, pressure test is designed to validate the pipeline to a certain flaw size in the pipe as it was manufactured. But with the metallurgical testing that was employed, it showed that the pipeline may be strong, a strong material, but it's more brittle, so that the flaws can grow, possibly even in response to a pressure test. So that evidence wasn't put into the record, so the CPUC, based upon the recommendation from the administrative law judge, did not include the final testimony of our expert. We think that's essential to be in the record. The second legal error that we think occurred is that the CPUC and the administrative law judge are applying the wrong standard to pipelines such as Line 147. The pressure, according to Dr. Stevick, should be no more than 240 pounds per square inch. And that's because using conservative assumptions, that should be the number that is used for pipelines that are built and in service before 1970 that have significant unknown segments. That is based upon how these types of lines should be evaluated. We disagree with the CPUC's decision on that. We think that's error to apply that standard, to apply the standard that they're applying, which is just a validating 2011 pressure test. That's not the complete end-all of how you evaluate pipes with unknown features. And remember, this line, 1/4 of it approximately has unknown features. So 3.8 miles long, about a mile has been acknowledged by PG&E that they don't know what's in the ground. That is one of the bases for our big concern. That's why we're asking for it to be pigged, so that the unknown segments could possibly be narrowed down, because once you get inside the pipe, you might be able to identify what the pipeline is, and we could have a better handle on what type of materials are there. The second action we're considering is based upon a pending petition that we already have that hasn't been ruled on. And we've requested that the CPUC award the city its costs and expenses in pursuing this. We were not, this was thrust upon the city of San Carlos, and we believe the CPUC, with its equitable powers, can order PG&E to reimburse the city for its significant costs in dealing with this. That has not been decided yet. The administrative law judge has not set a hearing to hear testimony from the city or our consultants to hear the issue, and it's of course not been set at the CPUC yet. So we want to pursue that and make sure that that gets considered fairly and completely. We also, to address the issue of the fact that we're not satisfied with the safety of the unknown segments of Line 147, there's another proceeding at the CPUC that we have not been involved in that involves, the acronym for it is PSEP, the Pipeline Safety Enhancement Plan. And that process is the process by which, as I understand it, pipeline segments are evaluated for replacement. So one of our goals is if PG&E is not going to properly test the line, then the one way to satisfy the city's concern that it can operate at these pressures that they say is needed to deliver gas would be to have the line have no more unknown features and have all known features, which would be a good way to validate the pressures that PG&E says they need for the line. The other action is related to what I talked about earlier. Is Commissioner Florio at the hearing on December 19th indicated on the record that he did not consider, and the board and the CPUC did not consider the hearing closed. So we're going to file Dr. Stebik's complete testimony and supplement the record. So again, it's in the record. Another action that's not related to the litigation that I'm going to be bringing forward to you in the coming year will be a comprehensive look at the city's code with regard to uses of our rights-of-way. I've done some research on the scope of our authority in our rights-of-way, and they're very broad. The scope, we don't have a comprehensive ordinance that deals with encroachment permits for any users of our rights-of-way, whether it's PG&E or telecommunications companies or other providers. And it's this incident has kind of brought to fore that we don't really have the type of ordinance that we need in this day and age to deal with all the utilities and all the demands that our public works department's dealing with. And one of the issues that I think is significant in this is that PG&E right now, because we don't have a specific requirement for an encroachment permit to do work in our right-of-way, just does work without asking us. That's exactly what happened in October of 2012 when the leak was first uncovered. There was no requirement specifically in our code that PG&E come in for an encroachment permit to do the work in the right-of-way. And we, if we had had that, it's possible that PG&E would have come in for an encroachment permit. At least we would have known about it. Instead, PG&E decided to not tell us about it, and we think this is one way that at least we can get the force of law that would require them to do it. And if they don't, there would be consequences at a local level under our local municipal code for not informing us. That would go not just for PG&E, of course. It's going to go for any provider, whether it's the water company, the telecommunications company, or PG&E with their gas pipelines that are in our rights-of-way. So it's time that we take a look at that ordinance. So that's the end of my report. If you have any questions for me or Mr. Maltby, we'd be glad to address those.
Questions? Okay. Did you have a question?
I just want to just go over a couple minutes.
Go for it.
All right. I'm just taking some notes. It's been going on for what, 4 months? I just want to clarify what we know and what we don't know. All right? Tell me if I'm off base. The first thing I've heard and that we've been hearing is that PG&E doesn't know what's in the ground. It also seems like they don't really want to know what's in the ground. They don't recognize the work of our experts. They don't want to lower the pressure on the line. It seems that they don't want to repair or replace the line. They don't even know if the hydrostatic testing has damaged the line. Am I right? Okay, I'm just my notes. They didn't tell us what they knew when they knew it for, 11 months. So the only thing I do know is that they've spent how many millions on a public advertising campaign in the last 4 months. I'm just mystified at this whole process. I don't know what else to say, but I just wanted to clarify those points. Thank you for sort of giving us a capsule again.
I had a couple of comments that I wanted to make. I appreciate the report from both the city attorney and the city manager. Like Mr. Collins, I am at the very least perplexed by the way PG&E has handled this whole situation from start to finish. I'm also very concerned that the way things stand right now today, we have not resolved what I think are some very serious safety concerns that ought to be on the minds of people in San Carlos. I spent a lot of time trying to figure out how to explain this, and I've talked to a lot of people over the holiday period who have stopped me on the street wondering what's going on and how fearful they should be. So I want to start out by saying that, to the best of my knowledge, this isn't a situation where people ought to be fleeing from their homes at all. But it's very disturbing that there's a mile of pipeline that has thousands of people potentially living next door to it in our town, where not only don't we know what it is, PG&E doesn't know what it is. When they think they know what it is, sometimes it turns out that's not what's in the ground. And on top of all of that, in some instances, when we discover what is in the ground, it turns out it's exactly the kind of material that high-pressure hydrotesting, pumping the line full of water and pressurizing it, might actually introduce flaws into it. So when PG&E tells us and the CPUC affirms for us, well, hydrotesting is the gold standard, it shows the pipeline safe, and yet at the same time, their own engineer was the one who raised the question, as Mr. Maltby pointed out, that maybe the hydrotesting is causing flaws, and then our own metallurgical expert says, yeah, this is the kind of metal that could be subject to those kind of flaws, and yet nobody is trying to do something about it pronto. That's very disturbing to me. I just can't imagine how that's an acceptable outcome for either PG&E or for the PUC, and certainly not for the citizens of San Carlos. And I really think we need to keep this issue in front of people. I think we need to find a way, I think staff needs to find a way to communicate exactly what the situation is to the public. In some levels, it's a complex story. In other levels, it's a very simple story. We have a few simple questions about safety that have not been addressed that need to be addressed. It's admittedly a little bit of a unusual response, but I actually think that we ought to maybe revisit and extend an idea that Councilmember Grocott had brought up in one of our strategic, actually I think in a couple of our strategic planning sessions, where we consider the option of creating our own local utility system. I believe he did it in the context of the electrical utility system, which I think has been done someplace up in Marin County to great success. But maybe we need to go beyond that and look at both the gas and the electric systems, and maybe we need to be having some conversations with neighboring communities to see whether or not they want to join in on something like that. San Mateo County has a long history of effective joint power authorities to deal with multi-community issues of public concern, and this may be yet another one. And as I said, that's a rather extreme step, but if PG&E is not going to take the steps necessary to protect us, and the PUC is not going to take the steps necessary to protect us, then ultimately I think we need to think about ways to take the steps to protect ourselves, because that's our duty to keep the members of our community safe. And I guess, in fact, let me sort of riff off of that in closing here. I guess there's not really closing until we get this mess fixed up in some way or another. We've had a lot of discussions about things we'd like to see happen. We've had a lot of back and forth with various people inside of PG&E and with PUC representatives. We should continue having those discussions. I'd actually like to suggest to my colleagues that I think we need to invite specifically Mr. Chris Johns, who is the president, as I understand it, of PG&E, to come into our chambers and talk to us and have a conversation with us. And that's not, I don't mean to diminish the capabilities of any of his direct reports, but at the end of the day, the buck stops at his desk when it comes to making decisions on how to balance safety and service in the assets that PG&E manages. And within the confines of the city of San Carlos, the buck stops at this dais on those kind of safety issues as well. And I think those two parties that have overlapping concerns and are basically peers with each other really need to have some face-to-face conversations and try and get to the bottom of this and try and get some attention focused on resolving these issues quickly. I mean, there shouldn't be any question, as Mr. Maltby was pointing about we don't know why they don't want to accelerate pigging the line. We don't know why they don't want to put in sensors from one end of the line and the other end of the line. And these all seem like very simple things to do, and yet we don't have answers to them. And I just think it's time that we cut to the chase and get the head guy here, and let's have the head guy talk to the head guys in San Carlos and see if we can't get some movement on this. So I'd like to leave that as a question for the dais. I mean, what do you guys think about that?
I think it's a great idea.
Yeah, I mean, I think if we think it's going to be an effective discussion, yeah, absolutely.
I don't think there's any problem with having Mr. Johns being asked to come down and talk to us. As you mentioned, there are a number of items that would seem to me, not to repeat what you said, but that could alleviate a lot of the issues that we have, especially that mile long that we don't know. It was implied, or Mr. Collins indicated that advertising that's been going on. And I apologize, I can't remember the gentleman's name, but I know he's got 29 years of experience working for PG&E, because I've seen that commercial about 1 billion times. And he looks pretty efficient. I saw him with getting down there actually fixing a pipe. Why don't we get him to come and look at our pipe? What the heck? What do you think? So, anyway.
Whatever works. All right. So staff has some clear takeaways on what we'd like to do. And again, thank you very much for your report. Appreciate that. I suppose I should ask if there's any public comment that anybody wants to make on this item. I don't have any cards on it, but if there's anybody who wants to speak. Okay. Let's move on then. Our next item is consideration under new business. Consideration of adopting a resolution of intent to amend the City of San Carlos's PERS, the Public Employee Retirement System, Safety Retirement Contract to add Government Code 20434. Ms. Mendenhall.
Good evening, Mayor and City Council. Rebecca Mendenhall, Administrative Services Director. Before you tonight is the consideration to amend our existing contract with CalPERS. So a little background on this item. This is one that's been in, that's had some time involved. As part of our creation of the San Carlos Fire Department back in 2011, the city first amended its PERS contract to create a new safety tier, or 2% at 50. As part of our fire services contract with Redwood City, the city has an obligation to reclassify our existing fire inspector position into a fire prevention officer position. The fire prevention officer has additional duties over the fire inspector position, and these include technical and investigative work pertaining to the prevention and control of fires. On June 24, 2013, the council approved this new position of fire prevention officer. Once we had the council approval of the classification specification, we could then send it to CalPERS to have them review it to see if this position would fall into a safety category or miscellaneous category. On August 8th of 2013, the city received written notice from PERS that this position would qualify as a safety position, but however, we would have to amend our existing contract with CalPERS. So the city began working with CalPERS to get the revised contract amendment, which we received in October. Once we had CalPERS approval and the amendment, since the employee contribution for the employee in the fire inspector position will increase from 8% to 9%, we have met and conferred with the union to discuss this change. So the city's current safety PERS contribution is 19.9%. The city's miscellaneous PERS contribution is 14.8%. But since miscellaneous employees also participate in Social Security, the total employer pension contribution for miscellaneous employees is 21%. So therefore, the total employer increase, while the safety tier is higher than the miscellaneous, the increase is offset by no longer needing to contribute to Social Security. And the same is true for the employee contribution. So should council adopt the resolution before you tonight, the next steps would be to have the employee election, which will occur this week. Then in February, the council would adopt the ordinance following the second reading. The first reading will be tonight. The effective date of the ordinance would be approximately 30 days following, or March 12th. And the contract effective date would be the first pay period following the effective date of the ordinance, or tentatively March 24th. On that date, the position of fire inspector will become inactive, and the employee will be reclassified to the safety position of fire prevention officer. So with that, I'm happy to answer any questions you may have.
Thank you, Ms. Mendenhall. Questions? Seeing no questions, I don't have any public comment cards. Is there anybody who wants to make public comment on this item? Okay, seeing none. As I mentioned at the start of the meeting, we can certainly discuss this, but we ought to start by a motion and a second.
Mr. Mayor, I'd like to make a motion to adopt Resolution 2014-3, resolution of the City Council of the City of San Carlos of intention to approve an amendment to contract between the Board of Administration, California Public Employees Retirement System, and the City of San Carlos.
Is there a second?
Second.
Roll call, please. Pardon me, any discussion? Roll call, please.
Councilmember Collins?
Yes.
Councilmember Grisilli?
Yes.
Councilmember Johnson?
Yes.
Mayor Obert?
Yes.
Mr. Mayor, I'd like to introduce an ordinance number
1471.
1471, an ordinance of the City Council of the City of San Carlos authorizing an amendment to the contract between the City Council of the City of San Carlos and the Board of Administration of the California Public Employees Retirement System.
Second.
We have a motion and a second. Any call for discussion? Seeing none, we'll call the roll.
Councilmember Collins?
Yes.
Councilmember Grisilli?
Yes.
Councilmember Johnson?
Yes.
Mayor Obert?
Yes. And thank you, Mr. Grisilli, for recognizing that we had the ordinance as well. It's always nice to have a pro, do these things. I'm old. I wasn't going to say that. Okay, experienced.
Experience, yes, not old. That's right, experience.
Okay. With that, we will move to item 10B, consideration of adopting a resolution to approve a financing agreement with Silicon Valley Clean Water, formerly known as South Bayside System Authority, for 2014 wastewater revenue bonds, and to approve a supplemental agreement number 6 to the joint exercise of powers agreement and other related actions. Mr. Walters.
Good evening, Mr. Mayor, members of council. Jay Walter, Public Works Director. And before I get started tonight, I just wanted to let the council know that in the audience to assist with questions that you may have is Dan Child, General Manager for the South Bayside System Authority, as well as Alex Handlers from Bartle Wells and Associates, who has been intimately involved in the SBSA financing preparation for this bond issuance, as well as the city's own sewer rate consultant for the last year. So I trust that between the three of us, we will be able to answer any questions that you may have. So tonight, again, what we're asking the council to consider is the 2014 bond needs for the SBSA Capital Improvement Program. Also to consider a name change for the authority, as well as it relates to that, adopting an amendment to the Joint Powers Agreement, which will officially change the name. So your action will be adopting a resolution to approve the financing agreement and this supplemental agreement 6, which is for the Joint Powers Agreement. So just a quick overview. I know Councilmember Johnson is new to the council in this regard, and so I thought I'd maybe just do a quick overview. Our city wastewater collection system serves our residents of 28,800 and businesses. We have roughly 11,000 sewer accounts in the city, primarily residential. We have the wastewater collection system in the city, about 105 miles of pipes with 6 pump stations. Our wastewater, when we flush the toilet, goes through the series of pipelines out to the South Bayside System Authority treatment plant. And that is out at the eastern edge of the San Francisco Bay. And that eventually is treated and disposed of in the bay. The city is a member of what's called the Joint Exercise of Powers Agency, along with Redwood City, Belmont, and West Bay Sanitary District. SBSA is facing many challenges, not the least of which is the capital improvement program, which is currently programmed at over $430 million for 10 years. Capital project construction for SBSA is progressing, although it's a little slower than what was originally anticipated. And SBSA management has taken the steps to prepare for a bond sale of $60 million, which was approved at their meeting last week, the total amount. And this will provide them needed capital to begin more projects in 2014. And as part of the process, the SBSA needs an approved financing agreement from the City of San Carlos and other JPA members to be able to proceed with their bond sale. So the financing agreement is required by the JPA whenever there's a need for bonds. The council approved a financing agreement in the spring of 2013 as we were preparing for our own sewer rate increase at that time, but that's not being considered tonight because that was in 2013, and in my conversations with the general manager, he indicated that the staff and consultants felt like getting a fresh start with the 2014 bond sale would essentially put that one in the past, and so we're not considering that one, and it doesn't linger about for any sort of subsequent financing agreement. We are now asking you to consider the 2014 financing agreement version. One of the questions that came before us today before the meeting was the fact that as an attachment to your staff report, the financing agreement is in a draft form. That is, there are a number of blanks that are not filled in there. And in my conversations with Mr. Child, he indicated that the reason for that is because some of those blanks can't be filled in until the actual bond sale occurs. And so we move forward with the draft agreement. Once the bond sale is finalized, a number of those blanks are filled in. But our repayment obligation essentially is as per the Joint Powers Agreement. So there's no sort of fill in the blank to whatever you want. The City of San Carlos is obligated for a little over 15% of these bond proceeds to repay, and that's what it will be once the bond sale is final. And the city is not responsible for any other member obligations either. The term used from the financial consultant was there is no cross-collateralization. Don't ask me to define that term, except that I know that means we aren't on the hook for any default from another agency within the JPA. So that's a comforting thought in that regard. The San Carlos Sewer Utility is a financially self-supporting enterprise. That means that our service charges are the main source of our revenue, and the rates need to be adequate to fund the costs of providing service, as well as operating capital needs. And that not only includes the city's collection system, but also the treatment plant for which we are a member of the JPA. Last spring, the council approved a series of 3-year rate increases, and these included funding for the SBSA bond and capital projects. We did an estimate, and at the time, the consideration was, if I remember right, it was either $80 or $100 million in our financial projections that we had essentially laid out rate increases to help us fund the debt service for those bonds. So I believe we're well prepared based on previous increases from our sewer rates. And again, the city's share of the capital program is just a little over 15%. So where is SBSA in terms of their sewer financing? On the screen is just a quick note of previous bond issues from 2008 and 2009, which are either completely spent or fully encumbered. The SBSA has received and has utilized a line of credit of $30 million, which is open and well encumbered with current capital project expenses. And they have about $47 million worth of SRF loans, which are state low-interest loans, state revolving fund, low-interest loans, which agencies can take advantage of for wastewater-type improvements. So as you can see, they have a lot of capital out there, but yet the driving force behind this bond issuance and the need for this additional money is the capital improvement program. In the future, they will continue to pursue more low-interest loans through the state, and at this point in time, they will be utilizing the $60 million bond proceeds to help get some more projects underway, as well as replenishing the line of credit that has been utilized, and really sets them up well for continuing down this path of a very aggressive program of improvement. So the SBSA name change, an interesting thing that probably, at least I would never have guessed, but the SBSA, the South Bayside System Authority, was not a known entity in the bond market. So financial consultants who were recommending that SBSA should consider changing their name to something that better reflects who they are, what they do, and where they're located. Because it's pretty difficult to guess where South Bayside System Authority is or what they do based on just that name alone. They were also informed that it's possible that it could potentially save as much as $750,000, which had equated to 5 basis points in interest costs for this bond issuance by having a better known name that reflected where they were and what they do. So as it was determined by the general manager, their new name will become Silicon Valley Clean Water. Of course, it's associated with a very well-known location, not only regionally, but worldwide, and it tells by that rebrand that their business is clean water. And that's one of the things, very positive effect. Being a wastewater agency, sewer, wastewater, and those kind of things, sanitation, those all have more negative connotations. Clean water, very positive, and that's definitely the business of the treatment end of the pipeline that discharges into the bay. So the next steps in this process, the SBSA staff will be entertaining rating agencies in the next couple of weeks. City staff will have, I will probably be attending those meetings as they talk with those rating agencies before the bond issuance. The final bond documents will be prepared and bonds will likely go on sale in February of 2014. And the first payment will be due in August 2014, and then annual payments of principal and interest in February of each year going forward. That sets us up about 6 months off the cycle of where we're currently paying bonds. So we're not, we haven't completely, or SBSA has done a good job of trying to separate so that we're not paying so much money at one time during the course of the year. So for council tonight, what we are asking you to do is adopt a resolution that approves the financing agreement for the 2014 bonds, approves supplemental agreement 6, which is to the joint powers agreement, which essentially involve the name change. And so those sections of the agreement that had been South Bayside System Authority will be Silicon Valley Clean Water. And at this point, I'll turn it to council for any questions you may have. And again, I'll reiterate Dan Child and Alex Handler's in the audience tonight if I'm not able to handle them. So,
thank you, Mr. Walter. And by the way, as my colleague, Mr. Vasili, pointed out to me, with all the time you and I spend together working on issues, I apologize for messing up your name when I introduced you before.
no offense taken. It's been a lifelong thing.
I bet it has.
Fair enough. Questions? Mr. Johnson.
Thank you, Mr. Walter. There was one item I was confused about. You mentioned that the council approved a financing agreement in 2013, but that was not acted on, and then we're being asked to approve a financing agreement in 2014. Can you explain that a little bit more?
Yes, and probably I should have taken just a little bit more time then to say. But back at that point, the SBSA was envisioning going out in the summer for a bond issuance. And by utilizing...
Was that for the same amount or similar amount? Or?
It was actually for a larger amount, at least being considered at the time. And by being able to use their line of credit for capital expenses, and a little bit of a slower progress on some of the capital projects, they were able to defer that, and so they did not issue bonds last summer, and it has now come around to about 9 months later, and they want to go forward now.
So what was approved in 2013 is effectively expired?
It is effectively superseded by this 2014 financing agreement.
I see. And then one additional question. You talked about, that this money is going to be used to fund projects. Can you give a little bit of color on what kinds of projects, or if there's any specifics you can share?
I think I'll ask Mr. Child to come up and address that directly.
SBSA is in the process of, as Mr. Walter explained, implementing almost a $500 million capital improvement program that is updating and repairing facilities at the treatment plant. The major projects that are coming in the near future, and when I say near future, I'm talking the next 2 years, realistically are more focused on what we refer to as the conveyance system, which is the pump stations and our large force main that runs from each of the cities out to the treatment plant. The total value of that project's about $230 million. So this is the first step in really getting that moving along.
Thank you.
You bet.
One additional question. So can you talk a little bit about the strategy of sort of borrow as you go? And it seems like you've been utilizing different financing options, revolving lines of credit, bonds, et cetera. Is that, as you look out, say, over the next 5 to 10 years, is the rest of the strategy sort of set, or is this, you're working on specific projects and then, there's a need for another chunk of money and you evaluate your options at the time?
The short answer is yes. To get into a little more detail is that state revolving fund, the SRF loans, are by far the least expensive money. Right, our last loan was 1.8%. However, the state has some very specific criteria on what is eligible and what is not. We are doing our very best to expand our ability to use state revolving fund loans. They have actually expanded their definition of what is available. We anticipate that the vast majority of the work yet to come will be done by state revolving funds, but that also depends on whether they approve them, so they have that flexibility. The line of credit, as Mr. Walter explained, is used solely as a cash flow management tool to allow us to not take out loans any sooner than needed. The line of credits are also fairly low interest. They're around a little over 2% money, so they're a good deal as well. The problem with the line of credit is it's a 3-year term, so at the end of 3 years, at the longest, we have to repay it. So that comes into play. And then bonds, we can utilize bonds, but their interest rate is closer to 5%, and it makes it a little more expensive money over the long run. So it's a puzzle that we have to put together as we're going through the process. But at this point, we think with this bond sale, we may have one more bond sale in the next year or so. But after that, we really think we'll pretty much be looking at SRF loans from there on out.
Thanks.
You bet.
Mr. Collins?
Just a quick question. I don't know which of you answers this. It's, forgive me, it's a silly question. The whole thing about the name change, have there been discussions with the people, representatives of the bond market, that when you suggested the Silicon Valley Clean Water, they say, oh yeah, that sounds good, we like that, and we're more inclined to
I'm probably the best of the three of us to address that. The answer to your question is yes, we actually have received positive feedback. The information we're receiving from underwriters is that the really big institutional investors probably isn't going to make a big difference because they dig into things and really check you out anyway. But it's the secondary market and the second tier and the private side investors that they're going through looking for something that they want to invest in. And South Bayside System Authority said nothing. Most people would just, in their minds, would just go right by it. Silicon Valley Clean Water, they think it'd be a catchier name. It's one of those things that there's no way to ever quantify whether it really saved you money or not, because you can't go out with two bonds at the same time and see what the results are. But it was something that was brought to us at the consultant level. We have talked to people in the underwriting market, and they think it's a very strong and positive idea.
But it looks good on their annual report, right?
I'm sure it does.
Sure it does. Thank you.
You bet.
Mr. Casilli?
No, being the representative, I've gone over all this, and so I didn't like South Bayside System Authority. I had no idea what that is, but I certainly not sure what Silicon Valley Clean Water is either, but I think it's a catchier name, so.
Very good. I actually don't have any questions. I just had two requests. One is a relatively minor one, which Mr. Walter touched on, which is just as I may be a little bit of a stickler on this. In general, I prefer to have as many of the blanks filled in on our agreements that we're voting on as we can. Obviously, anything having to do with financing terms and conditions when you go into the market, that can't be done ahead of time. I'm very familiar with that, but I personally would take a little more comfort from having, the percentages of what our responsibility is actually in the documents. Not that I don't believe that, there's no risk to us, but I like to see the I's dotted and T's crossed that way.
Could I maybe clarify one thing? The city of San Carlos is responsible for 15.14% of the capital improvement programs, but the percentage of the bond, the city of Belmont does not participate in our bonds. They pay cash themselves. So your percentage of the bond is actually 16.72%. So I just want to make sure you're clear.
I'd forgotten about that. But the fact that we know it to 4 decimal places says that we know it, right? So, and the other thing I was going to ask, which is probably best directed at Mr. Maltby, given the magnitude of this project, I actually would appreciate getting, I don't know what the frequency would be. I wouldn't mind getting some regular updates on how things are going, not only in terms of the project, but costs, just to give us, particularly if there's any early warning signs of things that we need to be thinking about or start alerting our community to. This is the largest single capital investment project that San Carlos has undertaken in a long time. It's just somebody else is doing it on our behalf and doing a great job at it, but I'd still like to make sure that we know what's going on.
Through the chair, I think I can provide that information. Certainly, because we meet every month and we have all the information, that I can provide monthly reports or quarterly reports, whatever the other council members and the mayor would like, and how we're doing. It's not getting any cheaper per se, but it's not so far. I think many of the projects have been under budget, and timing has been a little bit stop and go, because a lot of these things we have to get permission from State Fish and Wildlife, from other government agencies, and they don't move that quickly either. But we're on track, and the next couple of 3 years, as Mr. Child mentioned, is going to be the highest amount of monies that we're going to be spending. It's basically going to go like this, and then about 2017, it's going to, and then 18, 19 will be flattened out completely. So we hope to have it done by 2019. So, but I'll be happy to give monthly or quarterly, whatever folks want on the report.
I really appreciate that, Mr. Casilli, and I just want you to understand that I really do appreciate it. I was not trying to put an extra burden on the report. So.
And I want to assure you that the reason I really haven't done it is because, for all intents and purposes, we're going in the same, pretty much in the same progress in what we anticipated. So there hasn't been any oh my God moments type stuff. So anyway, make sure I get that back to you.
I'm even more glad to hear that. Thank you. So with that, we have a resolution here. Would anybody care to?
Mr. Mayor?
Yes.
I move we adopt resolution number 2014-4, a resolution of the City Council of the City of San Carlos authorizing execution and delivery of a financing agreement with Silicon Valley Clean Water relating to 2014 wastewater revenue bonds and approving related documents and other official actions.
I'll second.
We have a motion and a second. Is there any call for discussion? Seeing none, we'll do the roll. Oh, excuse me. Wait a minute. I have to ask, anybody want to make public comment on this? Should have done that sooner. Seeing none, now. Ms. Moy, you can call the roll.
Councilmember Collins?
Yes.
Councilmember Grisilli?
Yes.
Councilmember Johnson?
Yes.
Mayor Obert?
Yes. All right. If my colleagues would entertain this, I'd actually like to take item 8K, the item we pulled off, or I pulled off the consent agenda, out of sequence and not do it at the end of the meeting, just because I realize belatedly we do have one speaker who would like to comment on it, and the remaining items on our agenda, while important, are more internal sort of housekeeping matters. Is that acceptable to everybody? Mm-hmm. Okay. So, Mr. Maltby, we'll do the authorizing the city manager to issue the request for proposals for a hotel development at the landmark site. Mr. Svay.
Good evening, Honorable Mayor, members of the City Council. I'll just provide a little bit of background on this item. The City Council recently authorized the purchase of 3 properties comprising what we refer to as the landmark sites. And the reason is it's part of our economic development strategy and objectives. And also it could be, it could generate revenue up to $1 million. We anticipate that this site could foster about 200 rooms for hotels there. Back in the end of November, the City Council authorized the staff to move forward with the purchase and sale agreements on these properties, and at that same time requested that the Council Economic Development Subcommittee take a look at the request for proposals that we were preparing for the hotel development community to look at. And through the issuance of this request for proposal, the city's requesting proposals from qualified developers to design and build a new hotel or hotels at the landmark site. And the RFP outlines the roles and experience that we're looking at and the expectations of the city as well. And for instance, some of the things that we anticipate is that we're asking developers that have experience working with the local community that they built hotels in, what their experience is, and the availability of their capital to actually purchase the site, and if they some of the fiscal benefits of the project, and also one of the things that a couple of the things that the Economic Development Subcommittee was wanted in there is prevailing wage, and also they really wanted to stress the importance of working with the local community and working with the greater East San Carlos neighborhood. The proposals are, we hope, if it gets approved tonight, would go out tomorrow. They're due back on February 14th or February 19th, and that concludes the staff presentation. I'm available to answer any questions. We also have Jim Simon here, and I believe Nicole Murphy, our legal counsel, as well.
Thank you, Mr. Svay. Any questions for staff?
Just a quick one. Mr. Svay, approximately how much is in the Strategic Property Acquisition Fund at this time?
I believe it's around $5.4 million, and there's another fund, a similar fund that has a couple of million in it. So I think in total we have about $7 million plus or minus to use for the purchase of these properties.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, we do have one speaker card here. If there's anybody else who wants to speak, please fill a card out. Mr. Ian Lewis.
Thank you very much, Mr. Mayor and council members. I'm Ian Lewis. I'm the research director with Unite Here, Local 2. We're the hospitality workers union in San Mateo and San Francisco counties. We represent about 13,000 hotel and food service workers, including 3,000 in San Mateo County. The housekeepers, the dishwashers who make our industry tick. Hospitality is a cornerstone of our economy, and we're quite glad to see San Carlos taking such steps to embrace this industry, and in particular paying attention to issues as were just described, working with the community and prevailing wage for construction workers. But I want to speak specifically to service workers who are the permanent jobs at hotels. A hotel is an undertaking that has to be very carefully devised. It's a very high impact kind of development on the community, and that can be either for good or for ill. Jobs in our industry can raise standards for working people. They can provide living wages, guarantees that employees are treated respectfully. Or in some situations, they can pull down a community if employees are forced to rely on public assistance or the safety net. or have to resort to labor disputes to secure the respect that they deserve. I myself spend a considerable amount of my time working with developers to ensure that that projects are covered by so-called labor peace agreements that guarantee that those projects work out in the community's best interest. You have an opportunity before you as this process rolls forward to make sure that not only is this hotel the best it can be for the community, but that the city's proprietary interest is protected from any effects, any risk of costly labor disputes. So I wanted to say that our union is looking forward in the coming weeks, as this RFP deadline is nearing, to working with the developers, hopefully to execute labor peace agreements that make this a good project. And we look forward to working with you and with city staff as appropriate to that end as well. So I hope you'll keep these issues at the forefront of your attention. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Lewis. Any further questions, or if not, I will entertain a motion so we can have some discussion.
Mr. Mayor, I make a motion to authorize the city manager to issue the request for proposals for a hotel development at the landmark site in San Carlos.
A second.
There's a motion and a second. I did want to ask if the mover and seconder would entertain a friendly amendment to include a request that we ask bidders to provide some information on what they view the prevailing wage premium to be. We have actually made it as a requirement that the project be done at prevailing wages, but at some point we're going to have to figure out what that is in terms of numbers, and I would be interested in getting each of the bidders to provide some input on that.
I guess I'm confused. If we could have 5 bidders and 5 different numbers, what would that provide for us, except confusion? Mr. Malpe, I'm looking at you like...
Well, I think that would be useful information to have, to the extent that, you know, they provide it in their responses to show how they're, you know, essentially what costs they would be potentially passing off to the city as part of the development project.
Okay. So, again, I'm just confused on prevailing wage. Seems to be a fix, would be a number. Prevailing wage is prevailing wage.
Well, if I'm not mistaken, it can vary throughout the state and throughout time.
Okay.
And so I think our intent is that it would be prevailing wage, help me out with the language, within San Mateo County, the typical prevailing wage in our county. And, you know, the other thing that I would be looking for is probably prevailing wage today and whatever their anticipated construction schedule would be, which, you know, could be 2 years out from now. And again, that would just be an estimate, but it would be good information to have.
Well, whatever. Like I said, it's to me, it just, if you get 5 different answers, how are you going to choose which? I mean, I'm looking out ahead. Whoever gets to pick, how would you figure out which is right, which is the one, which lower, higher, in between?
Well, I don't know.
I'm confused about the whole issue. To me, prevailing wage is prevailing wage.
Yeah.
And for a carpenter in San Mateo County, prevailing wage is X. That's what I think. But maybe I'm wrong.
If I may jump in here, since I was the one who was bringing up the thing. I do think it's a little more complicated than that, and Mr. Malpe touched on one element of it. You know, for example, right now the local economy is recovering, and hence there's more and more construction activity going on. That will tighten up wage rates, and my understanding is historically that has tended to narrow the gap between between prevailing wages and non-union wages, and that ultimately is the subsidy that we will probably be asked to provide. And so, to me, it's important just to see what the lay of the land is. I wouldn't personally view it as definitive. I just view it as another piece of information I'd like to see.
Well, if you and Mr. Malpe on the same page, apparently, I'll be happy to amend my motion to include those words, whatever they specifically are. I don't know if the seconder would.
Well, just one question. So it sounds as though the intention is to ascertain what the city's subsidy would be under various proposals, rather than to have a debate about whether or not there should be a prevailing wage requirement.
Oh, that's correct. The council had previously, I think this was before you joined the council, Mr. Johnson, the council had previously provided directions to staff.
Okay.
On that, so.
And I'm fine.
Okay. Discussion, there's one other point I wanted to bring up as discussion, but does anybody else have things that they would like to say? The point I just wanted to make is in the review at the Economic Development Subcommittee that Mr. Survey was referring to, one of the discussion items that came up is this issue that the speaker that we had touched on as well. And personally, I think that both from a community values point of view and from a community, what do I call it, lack of dissonance point of view, I think there's some significant value in looking at maintaining, having a good labor environment here. And to the extent that what's been described as these labor peace agreements would get us that as part of this project, I personally would like to encourage staff to see if that can be worked into in the negotiating process and the discussion process with bidders. Others, I bring it up now because I'm not sure where other people come out on that, but that's certainly something that I think would be worth having. We're looking to have introduce a significant new hotel experience in San Carlos, and I'd like that not to be have any risk of it being marred, basically.
Well, I think it's good to know what our options are.
Okay,
that's all.
I agree. I think, whatever information we can garner, and from the folks, most of the hotels I think have it, and I shouldn't say most. There's a number of hotels in this county that have it, and some that aren't not union oriented. I think there's fewer, but as far as I'm concerned, I think we should, get all the information we can about the developer and who's going to operate. Not only the developer, but who's going to operate the hotel too, which could be two different parties.
It often is. That's right. Yeah. That's right. Anybody else have any comments? If not, we will call the roll.
Mr. Mayor, I just want to make sure for the record, the motion, there was an initial motion and then there was some discussion and a request for a friendly amendment, but you didn't have a vote on the amendment. There was discussion about what the amendment might be, but I want to make sure that we have it clear.
I accepted the friendly amendment, so I apologize if we were supposed to have a vote on that. Do we need
I think we want to make sure you accepted it, but the person who seconded it has to agree, and then I think we want to.
He did.
Okay, then I just didn't catch all that. I'm sorry.
Okay, that's quite. And I don't know the exact words, Mr. Rubens. I would leave that to the
staff. I think captured.
I think they got them. Okay, thank you.
Good. Ms. Moy?
Councilmember Collins?
Yes.
Councilmember Grisilli?
Yes.
Councilmember Johnson?
Yes.
Mayor Obert?
Yes. All right. With that, we will move back in sequence, and I believe the next item is item 10C, consideration of introducing an ordinance to amend Chapter 2.24.030, appointment removal vacancies of the San Carlos Municipal Code regarding prohibition of concurrent appointment to city commissions and boards.
Mr. Mayor and council members, brief staff report. There was some direction given to me to draft a proposed municipal code amendment to deal with an issue that doesn't come up too frequently, but we identified an issue that there could be a problem if we had single person serving on multiple commissions that might have some overlapping jurisdiction. And we thought it would be best to bring a code amendment to you that clarifies that issue, and then that'll become effective after your adoption, 30 days after adoption, which will be sometime in February. And our calendar now for commission vacancies is always June 30th, so I'm not sure if that affects any current commissioners or where their terms expire, but perhaps staff could clarify that issue.
Okay.
One quick question. So there's one gentleman who currently serves on 2 commissions, would he be grandfathered in, or would he have to give up one of his commissions?
That's a decision you can make tonight, whether you'd like that person to be grandfathered in or have to forfeit the appointment, because you're the appointing body, so it's up to you whether or not you'd like that to happen.
Would we do that by amending the resolution or just directing staff?
I think the way it's worded right now, it's a flat-out change, so it would be that on the effective date, a person couldn't be on 2 commissions anymore. So if you want to grandfather in, I would suggest adding a sentence that says this does not affect currently serving commissioners.
Through the chair, I apologize. What commissions is this individual on?
He's on, his name's John Sealing.
I know John, yeah.
He's on the Economic Development Commission and the Parks and Rec.
Okay, thank you. I don't personally have any problem with grandfather, because I think the terms in the next year or 2 will be up one way or the other, so I don't have a problem with Mr. Sealing serving for a short time of a year, or maybe at the most a couple, I think, and then I would assume would be moot. Is it Mr. Smallwood?
I actually think it might be closer to 2018 that his next.
Oh, is that right for either one? For either one? So it's 4 years?
I believe it's a ways out, yeah.
Wow. Well, I did not know our terms were that long on any of these commissions. I thought it was every 3 years we had to appoint or review.
I don't think it's that. I don't think it's 2018.
Can't be, because I thought every 3 years we were going to look at everybody.
That might be when the term limit comes up.
Ms. Moy, do you have the information?
Yeah, so we're good. 2015. I was mistaken.
Okay, no problem. 2015. So anyway. Personally, don't have.
Any other questions for council? All right. Well, I don't have any cards for public comment. Nobody wants to make public comment on this, I see. Okay. I'll entertain a motion so we can have discussion.
Mr. Mayor, I introduce ordinance number
1472.
1472, an ordinance of the City Council of the City of San Carlos amending Chapter 2.24.030 of the Municipal Code regarding prohibition of concurrent service on appointed commissions and boards, adding the paragraph, line, whatever, to grandfather in Mr. Sealing on the 2 boards that he sits on now. And then, go ahead, Mr. Rubens.
I was just going to say, I will amend the proposed language to add that this will not affect existing members until the termination of the term.
That's a little broader than what, because you cited it.
Yeah, no, you're right. You're absolutely right. Okay. Those words. That's the motion.
Is there a second?
Second.
We have a motion and a second. Any call for discussion? Seeing none, we'll call the roll.
Councilmember Collins?
Yes.
Councilmember Grisilli?
Yes.
Councilmember Johnson?
Yes.
Mayor Obert?
Yes. Next item on the agenda is 10D, consideration of adopting a resolution authorizing a mid-year budget adjustment in the amount of $52,000 and authorizing a professional services agreement to continue planning, economic development, and housing consulting services with Neil Martin and Associates, Inc., for a period of 3 years with the option of 2 one-year extensions.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor, members of the City Council. The Community Development Department has relied on staffing services for outside staffing services for planning, housing, and economic development for many years now. And NMA's, or Neil Martin and Associates contract, and Neil Martin has been working with the city for a number of years now. Their contract was nearing expiration, so to make sure that we're getting good and competitive service, we went out to the marketplace and sent out a request for qualifications to see who else would propose to work here at the City of San Carlos. And as discussed in the staff report, we sent out the RFP. We interviewed 2 firms. Neil Martin was one of those firms, and tonight we're recommending that the city continue working with NMA or Neil Martin Associates for contract staffing. The most recent contracts with NMA over the years have been a 3-year term, and we're in the amount of $300,000 per year. As part of the new 3-year term, the department is requesting a yearly amount of $337,000, and this figure includes a 15% contingency for each division. And in addition, the contract would allow the city to utilize NMA for major projects. And in this area, we would use fees that are reimbursed back to the city by the developer. And for the 6-month remainder for this fiscal year, anticipated costs are $168,000. Of this amount, $116,000 has already been appropriated by the City Council, and the remaining $52,000 is requested as this mid-year budget adjustment. And this $52,000 also includes the 15% contingency. This mid-year budget adjustment is needed to offset the cost associated with the loss of 2 full-time employees that we've had recently, and also we have an upswing in projects and project facilitation. While $52,000 is needed to cover our costs through the end of the fiscal year, we also have salary savings of about $20,000 from the Economic Development and Housing Manager that we can use to offset these costs as well. We anticipate that the costs from, or the revenues that the city receives from development fees will also offset these costs, and we believe that there won't be an impact to the general fund for this $52,000. To conclude, the overall cost to the city each year for the NMA contract would be $337,000, with the option of having an additional $100,000 for key project facilitation should the department need it. And in those cases, we would come forward to the City Council and ask for your approval to reimburse the contractor. And these fees, again, wouldn't come from the general fund. They would be reimbursed through developer fees. And that concludes the staff presentation. I'm available to answer questions. Also, we have our planning manager here, Lisa Porras, who can answer questions as well.
Thank you, Mr. Svay. Questions for staff? I have one quick question, Mr. Svay, which is the contract is 3 years and two 1-year extension options. So is it fairly typical for our, let me call them significant consulting contracts, that they look at a 3 to 5 year term? Because I presume that would be, it'd be 3 to 5 years before we would go put it out for bid again.
That's correct. I mean, that's been typical. That's been our practice here at the city, and I think it's the practice in other cities as well. I mean, you want to give some assurance to the contractor that, you know, they can project out. And also, for us, we need to have an assurance that we're going to have consistent and continuing professional staff that we can count on for an extended period of time. And it takes a lot of time and effort to go back out to the market, both for the consultant and the marketplace, too. We don't want to extend ourselves out in the marketplace, and nobody will then submit after a while. So,
fair enough. Thank you.
You bet.
I don't have any cards for public comment. Take it. I don't see anybody who's jumping up to make public comment on this item. So at this point, gentlemen, I will entertain a motion.
Mr. Mayor, I'll move that we adopt resolution number 2014-5. A resolution of the City Council of the City of San Carlos authorizing a mid-year adjustment in the amount of $52,000 and approving an agreement for consulting services with Neil Martin and Associates.
A second.
Any call for discussion? Seeing none, we'll do the roll.
Councilmember Collins?
Yes.
Councilmember Grisilli?
Yes.
Councilmember Johnson?
Yes.
Mayor Obert?
Yes. All right, we move to our last item, consideration of appointments to the City Council subcommittee and ad hoc committees for 2014.
Good evening again, Honorable Mayor and Honorable members of the City Council. Jeff Malpe, City Manager. This will be a very brief introduction for you. The City Council Code of Conduct and Ethics tasks the city's mayor with the unenviable task of trying to take a first cut and a recommendation at committee, outside and inside committee assignments for the council members for the coming year. It's customary that the mayor put forth a recommendation, and it's been the tradition of the city council to discuss that, yet the council holds the ability to approve the actual assignments for the council for the coming year. Staff is happy to help facilitate the discussion in any way we can as you finalize your committee assignments for the coming year. Thank you very much.
Any questions for staff? One introductory comment before we discuss. I think you've all noticed here, there are 4 committees that actually have no appointments in them for 2014. Those are all council committees or council ad hoc committees, and that's because based on discussions I had with Mr. Maltby, we believe the work of those committees is either completed or substantially completed. That's the case of the school property one, where there may or may not be something that comes up, and if so, we'll re-engage on it. So that's why there were no appointments on that one. There's also one addition, a proposed ad hoc committee, which says improving communication with technology, and perhaps when we do that, we can actually improve our spelling, or at least mine, because that should be improving communication with technology. And when we get to that point, we can discuss a little bit about what the idea behind that one was. So with that, I will open it up for, I guess, following my own comment from before, we should have, well, before we do the motion, if there are questions of me, since I helped put this together.
Mr. Mayor, so I have a little concern about approving this with one of our colleagues out sick today. And I wonder if we might postpone this to the next meeting when he's here and can have a conversation about it.
I have to admit, Mr. Johnson, I had thought about the same issue myself. I don't know whether there's ever been a situation like this one before.
Not that I can recall them, yeah, or we've had somebody out when we've done this.
And we have, with the exception of that one new committee, we have. Well, actually, that's not quite true. There are some items. There are some items where Ms. Clapper was on the committee before. Obviously, that's vacant at this point. I'd like to hear from Mr. Collins and Mr. Grisilli.
Well, the only thing I would say is there's going to be a CCAG meeting, or there's a City County Associated Government meeting in between, or our meeting, and there might be a couple of others. I would be inclined to vote for this, but then if Mr. Grocott has issues, to bring it back up again on the 27th. So he has another bite of the apple. If he has any issues, we can certainly bring it back up. But this won't preclude us from, at least in a couple of situations, perhaps CCAG, and I don't know what else we'll be meeting by then, having other folks sort of ease into the I'm looking at what he doesn't have. I don't know that he's in love with the airport roundtable. I don't know that he is, but thanks so much for putting me on it. And the same thing with the Airport Land Use Committee. I don't know, he's still a substitute there. I'm looking at Grand Boulevard Initiative. I don't know that, again, I'm just looking to see, I don't know specifically, but I'm just looking to see what the changes for him would be, at least in losing or changing around.
Actually, I think that's actually a good suggestion. I personally kind of like that. I mean, these are at the discretion of the council, and so can be changed whenever we choose to. We just generally tend not to choose to do it except once a year.
Yeah. Now, if someone went off, it's just through the chair, if someone went off like we had a couple years ago, then we had to go through and do it all again. So, yeah, I would be inclined to vote for this, and then just make sure Mr. Grocott is apprised of the situation, and if he has issues, you can contact the mayor, and we can work on the changes.
Okay. All right. Any questions that anybody has about what's here, or if not, I would entertain a motion.
Through the chair, before we entertain a motion, I just wanted to make, Mr. Johnson, you have the more difficult situation. Some of us are a little more flexible in our time. All four of us are actually. And so I just wanted to make sure that in my mind, I assume, or maybe the mayor already spoke to you about different times, and if you're the lead person on some of these, I just want to make sure that you're.
The one that I had a question about was the Airport Land Use Committee, and it says the fourth Thursday.
And I believe that's in the evening.
Okay.
Yeah, I'm almost sure, isn't it? Yeah.
Mr. Maltby, do you know the answer to that, the airport land use?
I don't. I can look into it for you.
Okay.
If it is,
I have a standing conflict in the mornings on Thursday, which I can't move.
Sure.
But outside of that, I can make it work.
Okay. I just wanted to make sure, because I know you have other issues, with work and things like that.
Children, yeah.
Work, things like that. the rest of them, I think, that's the other part of it. In certain cities, certain folks just can't get at certain times. So. Anyway, sorry,
That's
didn't mean to
fair.
interrupt.
No, that was, I thought, very helpful.
And maybe I can ask a question of my colleagues. Traditionally, has the alternate attended most of the time, rarely, not at all, to some of these regional committees, any other agencies?
In my experience, it's only been when the primary can't make it.
And that's rare.
Yeah, that's rare.
Yeah, I see.
Yeah,
Okay.
it's unless someone's ill or some personal situation. I think in mine,
I substituted for you at CCAG once.
and I don't think Mr.
substituted
Collins did it all, or maybe once. You did for me once.
But for
And Ron and I have substituted for each other on a couple of.
But for the council committees, the alternate is attending. Is that correct?
Yes, because that's actually, I should have indicated that.
Subcommittee.
Right, it's a
The
subcommittee,
subcommittees are not actually alternates, they're both. It's two people.
Well, just, Mr. Johnson, check with your calendar, but if it works out that the Airport Land Use Committee is not going to work for you, I'd be happy to step in.
Okay.
And if I may, through the mayor, we've just gotten information through the miracle of technology that the meetings tend to be 4 to 6 p.m.
Okay. That I can do.
Problem solved.
Actually, before, and again, if there are other questions that people have, we will entertain them. But before we move to any kind of motion, I did mention that there is one new ad hoc committee here. That's the Improving Communication with Technology subcommittee, ad hoc subcommittee. And what this is looking to do is to do a little brainstorming with staff on whether or not using some of the currently available, increasingly inexpensive communications technologies and contact technologies to see if there may be some things that the council might want to entertain in terms of making our meetings more accessible to the community, more interactive with the community, making interactions with staff, between the staff and the community more flexible. And I emphasize this is all just brainstorming. Nothing will be done that doesn't get brought back to the full council first, obviously, to discuss and decide, because we do have to be careful here in terms of changing anything that's a long-term tradition or adding undue complexity into the situation. But it just so happened in conversation that both Mr. Johnson and I had been thinking along some similar lines there, and I thought it would be useful to invest a little bit of time on this. So,
Sort of shocked I'm not on that committee. I don't understand why.
well, there's this other one that's called Improving Communication Using Paper.
Okay, good. All right, good. Can I chair that one?
Actually, when my internet connection died a little while ago, I was going to say, you were in better hands. You were using paper.
what I'm here
I might
for.
have to switch back. So,
Well, Mr. Mayor, I'll make, if we're through, I'll make a motion to approve the appointments that are listed on our paper here for the current, or for the next coming year, 2014.
is there a second?
Second.
Any further discussion? Seeing none, we'll call the roll.
Councilmember Collins?
Yes.
Councilmember Grisilli?
Yes.
Councilmember Johnson?
Yes.
Mayor Obert?
Yes. And with that, see it being 9 o'clock, shall we adjourn to closed session? Mr. Maltby?
There's something else we have to discuss in closed session?
Yes, there was
Oh,
labor.
If the council, we had one item that we did not get to on
Okay.
closed session. If you'd like to go back into
Okay,
closed
I'm
session
sorry. I
and
thought
discuss it,
somebody said they were
that's
gonna postpone
fine.
it. That's fine.
But
Sure.
again, there's actually no pressing issue to get to it tonight if you'd rather
We will
adjourn your meeting.
adjourn to closed session.